The Warhammer Fantasy Battles universe has a multitude of races and factions, each with their own lore, armies, and general uniqueness. In truth, many of the races and factions, which may seem the same, play very differently to one another. Lately, I have been talking to players, new and old, about how playstyles differ when playing different armies, and I figured that that would be an interesting topic to cover in a video, to help anyone who may be stuck on deciding on an army that they should play. Please bear in mind I will be going over each of the official 8th edition races and factions in this video, and I will not be covering them in detail, but rather briefly. If anyone would like more information, I will most likely make follow-up videos in the future, covering each of the factions individually in much more detail. But without further ado, let's begin. Firstly, we'll begin with the Beastmen. The Beastmen are a race of humanoid monsters and mutants who pride themselves on destruction. They don't care for petty things like armor, but rather what they can use for weapons. In my experience, both playing with and against the Beastmen, you should not expect them to be the most competitive of races. Most of their units wear little to no armor. Their ranged weapons are lacking at best, and in most cases you will need to field them in rather large hordes. That being said, if you're playing them for more of a fun factor, rather than only wanting to win, the Beastmen have a large variety of units, each looking rather menacing on the battlefield. They are the only true monster-centric race, and when used correctly, and if your dice rolls are in your favour of course, you can be quite devastating in the battlefield. Able to get turn 1 ambushes and make your enemy have to rethink his or her battle plan very early into the game. With numbers, you can easily overwhelm your enemies, but remember, as with everything, plan for every eventuality. In short, the Beastmen rely on hordes and magic, but lack in terms of armor and ranged weapons. Next, we'll move on to Britannia, a personal favourite of mine. The first thing you'll realise is that you will not have a large army when playing as Britannia. Peasants are subpar at best, and your bread and butter. In truth, most of your choices are heavily armoured horse-riding knights. There is not much to say other than if you are playing Britannia, be prepared to play hard and fast. A lot of combat will be decided if you get the charge in rather than your enemy, due to the power of the lance making your knights killing machines. Most, if not all of your knights have the Swift Stride rule, making it far easier to get into close combat during a charge. However, it is very important to note that you must keep your sides protected. The moment your enemies get into your flank or your rear, you are in for a really bad time. Your bowmen are relatively decent and pair nicely with the horsemen. So much so that you will be doing nice amounts of damage early on if you can plan your charges correctly and have a decent amount of ranged and magic to support you. Britannia is not the most varied army in the tabletop, but personally it is one of the most fun to play. In short, Britannia relies on cavalry, magic buffs, and ranged units, but lack any efficient ground units. Moving on to the third, and probably the most varied choice, the Demons of Chaos. The Demons of Chaos enjoy the fact that they are extremely varied, having 4 gods and respective armies spawned from said gods to choose from. You can easily find yourself fielding many different types of armies in many different games. Whether you enjoy the Fury of Khorne, the Diseases of Nurgle, the Secrets of Tzeentch, or the Pleasures of Slaanesh, each of their chosen warriors vary greatly. In many cases, you'll be expected to field rather large hordes of demons, but it's wholly up to the player if he or she wishes to make them devoted to one god, or work with various gods. Demons cannot take standard magical items that most races can, so if you're familiar with the ones from the Big Red Book, do not expect to see them on the table in your hands. Instead, demons get a rather unique system in the form of gifts, seeing their own versions of powerful items and artifacts. It is very important to note that the Demons of Chaos have a massive element of randomness in the form of their Reign of Chaos table. A table which can not only grant benefits such as summoning extra units and improving your current ones, but it can also work against you. Do not play this race unless you're prepared for an element of randomness that may give your enemy the win. In short, the Demons of Chaos are the most varied but lack true range. Their strength is in pure numbers, powerful weapons, and devastating spells. Our 4th spot belongs to the Dark Elves. Dark Elves, as can be expected, have decent range with their many multiple shot weapons. but it is with their melee attacks and their highly mobile units where they truly shine. Armed with a variety of weapons, and normally paired with poisoning or abilities that allow them to re-roll a multitude of attacks or wounds, the Dark Elves can easily be devastating on the battlefield. But players should be warned that they'll need to get into combat fast, or risk losing many troops to ranged fire. Witch Elves are normally seen as a very common core unit, and can be extremely devastating when flanking enemies, while also buffed up with the Law of Life spells, giving them incredible toughness, but this can also be your downfall if they're not buffed up, or in combat early, as they will drop like flies. You have a variety of cavalry and monstrous units that can easily grab you combat wins if used correctly, but they will be targeted if not put into position fast. Magic is very open to the Dark Elves, having use of the 8 common laws of magic and their own dark magic, leaving it up to the player and their decided playstyle to experiment with. In short, Dark Elves have a strong line of attack and magic, but their big units such as cavalry and monsters will be easily targeted. Our 5th spot is dedicated to the Dwarves. If you like magic, then this race is not for you. Dwarves have access to no magic, barring a few bound spells, which are very uncommon. Do not expect much from this race. Dwarves are known for their heavy armor and strong gun lines, but very low movement. It is rare that you'll see dwarf players moving forward, but rather staying very still while firing their large amounts of artillery and waiting for their enemies to come to them. Dwarves have the largest amount of artillery choices in the game, and take good advantage of that, able to launch large amounts of firepower onto enemy armies from a large distance. If the enemies get too close, the Dwarves have a very well known shield wall of units which can hold off quite large charges and push back their enemies. Combine this with a good old fashioned gun line and you will be an immovable object. In short, the Dwarves have powerful gun lines, warriors and artillery, but lack any magic and all cavalry. Looking at the Empire for our 6th spot. The Empire is easily the most versatile race in the whole Warhammer Fantasy battle setting. While in truth, none of their units are outright amazing, they have access to all different types of units, meaning an Empire player can easily change his or her list without any big issues. The downside of this race is while the Empire is extremely versatile, there are a lot of options when army building, and you may find yourself spending a lot of money in regards to list building and having options. The Empire enjoys the largest army roster by far due to the sheer amounts of units they have access to, which can make for very interesting combinations. I have personally seen artillery-based armies, devastating gun lines, and charge-based armies. In short, the Empire is the most well-rounded army choice for new players, given the amount of units, but they will require some work to make a competitive list. Looking towards the 7th spot, we have the High Elves. Do not expect much heavy armor with this race. The High Elves function more so as a glass cannon, using their powerful magics and incredible range to shoot their enemies from afar. Yes, they do have great melee units, but their low toughness will see them dying relatively quickly. The High Elves also enjoy a large variety of flying monsters, such as eagles, dragons and phoenixes, making them great at flanking and devastating enemy lines and war machines. It is important to note that High Elf lists should be built to be either offensive or defensive, but not as an all-rounder. Your units have various uses, but it is very unlikely they will have multiple uses at the same time. In short, High Elves have powerful magic and great range. They are well-rounded, but the former 2 points are their strongest. The 8th spot is for the Legions of Asgore, or more commonly known as the Chaos Dwarfs. This is by far the most expensive army, and should not be looked at unless you are prepared to drop a decent amount of cash onto your lists. This is simply because the Chaos Dwarfs are a Forge World army and not a standard Games Workshop army. A warning in advance, you should also be prepared for many resin-based models. That being said, the Chaos Dwarfs work very much the same to how their cousins do. Amazingly powerful gun lines, devastating war machines, and extremely tough warriors, with the added benefits of magic and monstrous cavalry. Chaos Dwarfs play very similar in respects to the Dwarfs, normally staying stationary and waiting for their enemies to come to them, while they launch barrages of ranged weapons to their enemies, with the added effect of magic. In short, the Chaos Dwarfs are very competitive but expensive in terms of real life money. Play this army if you are dedicated enough to spend a large amount of cash, or if you're playing in a community which allows the uses of proxied models. The 9th spot falls to the Lizardmen. Monsters, monsters and more monsters. Do not expect any great ranged units with this army, but rather powerful melee and quite scary magic when used correctly. The Lizardmen are generally seen as a defensive army, but can also work wonders as a full-on offensive force. They are not the fastest in terms of initiative, but can destroy units quickly if you can overwhelm your enemies with large amounts of skirmishers and giant lizards battering down enemy lines. That being said, their lack of movement can be a clutch in terms of board control, but planning ahead should allow you to overcome this issue. In short, Lizardmen have devastating magic and melee phases, and should be played offensively. For our 10th spot we have the Ogre Kingdoms. Do not expect large armies with this race. The Ogre Kingdoms work with a large amount of monstrous units, but are expensive of points. Commonly, Ogre Kingdom armies, even with 2,000 points, normally land around the 20 model range. They are slow in terms of fighting, but pack a massive punch. You'll be lucky if you'll be striking first at any point, but the moment you do strike, you will do large amounts of damage. They are paired nicely with magic and powerful war machines, but lack in terms of most standard range weapons. That being said, when your army is mostly monstrous units, do not expect to be defending at all. Get into your enemy's face, and get there fast. In short, the Ogre Kingdoms are a heavy melee-based race, but a relatively small army in terms of models. Keep your troops together defensively, but push forward as much as you can. Our 11th spot lands on the Green Tide, more commonly known as Orcs and Goblins. Their armies are varied, made up of various sub-races of the Greenskins. Their ranged and war machines are lacking at best, but where they do excel is their sheer numbers. It is very easy for players to be overwhelmed as a massive Green Tide controls the table and charges against them. That being said, be prepared for your green friends to kill themselves due to animosity rolls. Orcs and Goblins do have decent magic, funny enough, and can be used to break enemy formations and debuff them quite heavily. Be warned, your troops will lack any decent armor, but excel with most forms of weapons. In short, like the ogres, move fast into your enemy's face, but also use your large numbers to overwhelm their side flanks for quick and easy kills, while also making sure to use your magic lures to pair up with your horde. 12th is my absolute favorite race, the Skaven. Your units are cheap but weak. Your magic is brutal, and almost everything in your arsenal can explode. The Skaven are unreliable, but they are fun, and that's the main reason why you would play this race. Do not expect to win many games with this race until you get a good grasp on them, but the element of randomness can be very funny for both sides, depending on how serious you are about the game. Your army composition is based around large, cheap, but weak hordes, brutal monsters, great magic, and volatile weapons. That being said, the Skaven are an investment and not a cheap army to start, due to their cheap unit costs. Be prepared to drop a decent amount of money to field even a basic 2,000 point list. Hordes are your friends here, and do not think that standard unit sizes of 20 are worth it, because they are not worth it in any way, shape or form. In short, hordes and magic are your most reliable forces here. Pair them with mutated rats and war machines, but be warned you can turn the tide for both yourself and your enemy with even a single misfire. The 13th army choice is that of the Tomb Kings. The Tomb Kings are so much more different to their Vampire Count cousins, who we'll be covering shortly. Tomb Kings enjoy the fact that they have rather large monstrous units which pair nicely with their ranged units. Their basic units may not be the best, but they serve as moving blocks, while their stronger monsters get into position. Chariots are your friend here, and can be devastating when used correctly. Do not expect to move fast, however, as your undead have limited movement. That being said, your major weakness is losing your Hierophant. Protect him at all costs, or find your whole army destroyed within a few turns. In short, chariots and large unit blocks pair nicely. Protect your army commander or you will crumble. Use ranged units to pick off enemy lines. You're the only undead faction with ranged units. Take advantage of this. Moving on to the vampire counts at 14. Your basic units are horrible, but they are meant to be. Your ace in the hole is that your vampires can absolutely be extremely destructive, and despite the fact that your basic units can easily die, You can summon more in freely to bolster your forces. Like the Tomb Kings, your commander, usually a necromancer, must be well defended or you will risk losing your army, but a nice defensive line protecting him, while your vampire shreds down enemy lines, and your zombies keep your enemy in place, you should be relatively safe. Take advantage that most of your units cause fear and terror, and your enemies will be stuck worse for wear in most cases. Be prepared to use monsters to break apart your enemies and field large armies. Also, take many spare models due to summons, or else you won't be able to make good use of them. Unit fillers are your friend here. In short, numbers and vampires are your friend. Your magic is decent, but you will also have no range with this army, so be prepared to get moving up close and fast, or see yourself destroyed. Our 15th faction is the Warriors of Chaos. They are a heavyweight faction, with powerful magics, strong warriors, terror-inducing monsters. The main issue with this race is that you'll find yourself with some of the worst range in the game, so you'll need to be up close and fast. That being said, ranged weapons are pointless for the Warriors of Chaos, whose incredible armor saves and large variety of weapons see them beating down enemy lines with little to no problem. They have access to different magic laws and can fiend themselves around Chaos gods if they so wish, much like the Demons of Chaos. Blocks of Chaos Warriors are your friend here, your basic core being consisting of them. In short, get into combat fast or risk being shot down from afar. Even then, your incredible armor will keep your troops alive while they move forward. Lastly, we have the Wood Elves at 16th. These are the most mobile of armies, pairing the range of the elves themselves with their tree-kin allies. Your elves have great ranged weapons and are extremely mobile, but are class cannons in close combat. So it is always recommended to bring in tree-kin to act as a basic line of defense. Expect to be moving constantly, because if you get caught in combat, you will be easily cut down. Pair your army with some of the monsters to act as distractions, while your archers make quick work of enemy units, and add in some magic and you're in for some fun, but do not expect to stay still for long. In short, make good use of your ranged weapons, but keep moving. Magic can help greatly, and so will your tree-kin, but you lack war machines, so don't expect to take down enemy monsters without dedicating focus fire. But with that, we've briefly looked over all the available races and factions in the 8th edition core. In the future, I'm hoping to look over them in more detail to further help players decide on their chosen armies, dedicating singular videos to each army. But until then, my friends, we've come to the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel, as it really does help us out. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.